The 5-minute quantum technique that forces the field to answer you. Use it now, before this moment passes and the ordinary noise of your day pulls your attention somewhere else. Not because 5 minutes contains a magic formula, not because the field can be forced the way you might force open a stuck door, but because there is a very specific shift in posture, internal posture, not physical posture, that changes the relationship between you and whatever it is you have been waiting for, asking for, hoping for. And maybe that is exactly why you are here now, at this hour, staying instead of scrolling past. It is no coincidence that you are here. Let that sentence settle without needing proof, just as a possibility worth testing for the next few minutes, not simply believing. Before this video ends, you will understand 3 things. Soon you will see why asking, the way most people practice it, actually keeps the field at a distance rather than drawing it closer. Later you will understand what receiving actually feels like in the body, as distinct from wanting, as distinct from hoping, and why that distinction changes everything about how this technique works. And before we close, I will walk you through the 5-minute technique itself, step by step, slowly enough that you can actually practice it as you listen, not simply hear about it. So before we go further, take this as your first step. If any part of this message is already landing somewhere true in you, subscribe to this channel now, not as a reflex, but as a small, quiet commitment to keep practicing this kind of attention, instead of letting it dissolve the moment this video ends. When you subscribe, you are telling your own mind, I am willing to actually try this, not just watch someone talk about it. Because there are 2 kinds of people who arrive at a message like this one. There are those who watch, nod, feel briefly inspired, and never actually practice the technique being offered. And there are those who stay present enough right here in these next few minutes to actually do it, not simply understand it intellectually. You already know which one changes in actual life. For most of your life, you were taught that getting what you want requires asking harder, wanting more intensely, visualizing more vividly, repeating the request until the universe, or fate or luck, finally relents and delivers. This framework treats the field, whatever you understand that word to mean, as something reluctant, something that must be persuaded, worn down, convinced through sheer repetition of desire. But there is an older, quieter understanding, running beneath modern manifestation language, one that shows up across many contemplative traditions in different words. The idea that intense wanting actually creates distance rather than closeness, because wanting, by its very nature, emphasizes absence. Every time you intensely want something, you are also, simultaneously, emphasizing to your own nervous system that you do not currently have it. This is the first revelation. The intensity of asking and the likelihood of receiving are not the same variable, and treating them as the same variable is where most manifestation practice quietly goes wrong. Here is a simple way to feel this directly. Think of the difference between someone anxiously waiting by a door for a guest to arrive, checking the window every few seconds, pacing, growing more tense with each passing minute, and someone who has genuinely settled into an evening, present, at ease, trusting the guest will arrive when they arrive. Both people want the same outcome, but their internal states are entirely different, and anyone walking through that door would feel the difference immediately. The anxious tension in one case, the settled ease in the other. The field, in this metaphor, is the guest. Most manifestation practice trains people to become the anxious pacer at the window, and then wonders why the guest seems to take so long to arrive, or why, when they do arrive, the whole atmosphere feels strained rather than welcoming. Many people spend years practicing more intense wanting as their primary spiritual technique, treating desperation as devotion, treating anxious repetition as commitment. And sometimes, for a while, this seems to work, because enough sheer effort can occasionally force certain outcomes regardless of internal state. But the exhaustion is real, and the outcomes achieved through anxious forcing rarely arrive with the ease or sustainability that outcomes met from a settled state tend to have. This is the trap almost everyone circling manifestation practice lives inside without naming it. Mistake the intensity of asking for the mechanism of receiving, and wonder, years later, why so much desperate effort has produced so little actual, lasting arrival. There are those who will spend a lifetime pacing anxiously by the window, certain that more intense wanting is the missing ingredient. And there are those who will pause here, in this very video, and ask a quieter, more useful question. What if the shift I actually need is not to want harder, but to settle more completely, to move from the posture of asking into the posture of receiving? Not a promise, not a guarantee of a specific outcome by a specific date, but an invitation, testable starting right now. How imagineful. It is worth naming, too, why this confusion between wanting and receiving is so persistent, so difficult to simply think your way out of. Intense wanting produces a kind of energy, a felt sense of motion, of doing something about the situation, and that felt sense of motion is easily mistaken for progress. Sitting in settled receiving, by contrast, can feel disturbingly like doing nothing at all, and a mind trained to equate effort with worthiness often resists a state that offers no visible striving to point to. This is worth naming plainly, because many people who intellectually understand the difference between asking and receiving still default back to anxious wanting simply because it feels more like effort, and effort feels safer than trust, even when trust is the actual mechanism doing the work. Consider, too, how this shows up in ordinary daily moments, long before any major manifestation goal is even involved. Waiting for a text back from someone, and noticing whether your attention keeps returning to the phone every few minutes versus settling into whatever else you are doing. Waiting for test results, an interview response, an important decision from someone else, and noticing whether your body treats the waiting period itself as an emergency requiring constant vigilance, or as simply an unresolved period that does not require your nervous system to remain on high alert the entire time. These small, everyday waiting periods are actually excellent practice ground for the exact posture this technique is teaching, long before you ever apply it to something as large as a life-changing outcome. Now listen carefully, because this is where the title becomes more than a title. This technique does not force the field the way force is usually understood, through pressure, through intensity, through repeated demand. It forces a response the way presence forces a response, the way a truly settled, attentive person in a room changes the entire atmosphere simply by their quality of attention, without needing to raise their voice or insist on anything at all. You stop asking when you start receiving. Let that sentence rest here for a moment, the way a single note rests before the next one arrives. Not as a rejection of desire, not as a suggestion that wanting things is somehow spiritually inferior, but as a precise, testable observation about internal posture. Asking is a posture of reaching outward toward something perceived as absent. Receiving is a posture of opening inward toward something perceived as already, in some sense, available, even before it has fully arrived in physical form. Here is the quiet loop most people practicing manifestation live inside without naming it. Intense wanting generates anxious internal tension. That tension generates a nervous system state of scarcity and urgency. That scarcity state generates behavior, checking, forcing, controlling. That actually interferes with the ease required for genuine reception. And when the desired outcome takes longer to arrive, or arrives feeling strained rather than easeful, the person concludes they simply need to want it even harder, doubling down on exactly the posture that was creating the interference in the first place. Take a slow breath right now, without needing to close your eyes if you are not ready. Notice the quality of the air entering your body. Notice, honestly, whether your current relationship with whatever you want most right now feels like anxious reaching or settled trust. You do not need to judge whichever one you find. Just notice it clearly. This is the beginning of the shift this video describes. not achieving a permanently receiving state overnight, but noticing again and again which posture you are actually occupying in any given moment. If this message is beginning to touch something real in you, comment this phrase now: I am shifting from asking to receiving. Writing it will not instantly complete the shift, but it becomes a small marker your own mind can return to later. A quiet anchor point in an ordinary day. A reminder that you once, consciously, chose to notice your own posture instead of simply repeating old patterns of anxious desire. There is a particular myth worth naming directly, because without naming it, this teaching can be quietly misunderstood. This is not a message suggesting that all effort, all planning, all concrete action toward a goal is somehow spiritually inferior to passive waiting. Genuine receiving is not the same as doing nothing about your life. It is entirely possible, and often necessary, to take real, concrete steps towards something you want, while also holding the internal posture being described here. Steady, settled, undesperate. The difference is not between acting and not acting. The difference is between acting from anxious scarcity, where every action is fueled by fear that the outcome will not arrive, and acting from settled trust, where action flows from clarity rather than urgency. A person can send the email, make the call, take the class, and do all of it from either posture, and the posture, more than the action itself, tends to shape both the experience of doing it and, often, the outcome that eventually results. Consider, too, how differently a closed door gets interpreted from these two different postures. From anxious asking, a closed door, a delay, a no, tends to be interpreted as proof that the wanting was not intense enough, prompting even more desperate effort. From settled receiving, the exact same closed door can be met with a much simpler response. This was not it. Something else is likely on its way, without that response requiring any dramatic emotional collapse or renewed frantic effort. The door did not change. The posture receiving the door's message did. Now let the next layer open, because this is where the actual 5-minute technique lives, and I want to walk you through it slowly enough that you can genuinely practice it as we go, rather than simply listening to a description of it. Begin by settling your body wherever you are, sitting or lying down, whatever allows the most ease right now. Let your eyes close, or soften your gaze if closing them does not feel right in this moment. Take 3 slow, natural breaths, not forced, not dramatic, simply present with the sensation of air entering and leaving your body. This is minute 1, and its only purpose is arrival, letting your attention actually land in the present moment rather than remaining scattered across your day. For the second minute, bring to mind, gently, the thing you have been wanting, asking for, hoping toward. But instead of focusing on the wanting itself, focus on the feeling you believe that outcome would give you once it arrived. Not the specific circumstance, but the underlying feeling, ease, relief, excitement, peace, whatever it actually is beneath the specific request. Let yourself feel a small, honest taste of that feeling right now. Not because the outcome has arrived, but because the feeling itself is available to practice independently of the circumstance that would eventually produce it. For the third minute, notice where in your body that feeling lives once you allow a small taste of it. Perhaps it is warmth in the chest, perhaps it is a loosening in the shoulders, perhaps it is simply a sense of spaciousness behind the eyes. Let your attention rest there, in that specific physical location, breathing gently into it, not trying to intensify it or force it larger, simply staying present with whatever amount is actually available right now. For the fourth minute, silently offer the sentence forming underneath this entire message, timed to your breath. You stop asking on the inhale, when you start receiving on the exhale. Let the words be less like an instruction and more like a description of what is already, in this small way, actually happening in your body right now. In this exact practice, for the fifth and final minute, simply rest. No further instruction, no further reaching, no further effort. Let your attention settle into ordinary stillness, the way a pond settles after a stone has been thrown and the ripples have finally stilled. This final minute is, in many ways, the most important one, because it is the minute where receiving is practiced not through doing anything further, but through the willingness to simply stop, to let what has been cultivated in the previous 4 minutes exist without needing to be pushed toward any particular outcome. Here is something worth sitting with, honestly. This technique will feel strange the first several times you practice it, because a nervous system trained toward anxious asking does not immediately trust settled receiving, even when settled receiving is being deliberately offered. You may find your mind wandering back toward the specific circumstance, back toward checking, back toward old urgency, even mid-practice. This is not failure, it is simply the old pattern being noticed in real time, which is itself part of the practice, not a departure from it. Gently, without frustration, return to the breath, to the feeling, to the location in the body, as many times as needed. It is also worth naming that this technique tends to work best when practiced regularly, independent of any single specific outcome, rather than being reserved only for moments of acute desperation. A person who only reaches for this practice during their most anxious, high-stakes moments is essentially trying to learn a new posture for the first time under the worst possible conditions. The way trying to learn to swim for the first time in a storm makes far less sense than practicing in calm water first. 5 minutes daily, during an ordinary, undramatic part of your day, builds the actual capacity that will then be available when a higher stakes moment eventually arrives. Notice, without needing to change anything further, whether something in your body feels even slightly different than it did when this video began. Perhaps a small softening, perhaps very little has shifted, and that is completely fine too. This technique is not measured by a single dramatic result after one practice. It is measured the way any new internal posture is actually built, through quiet, repeated practice, until receiving stops feeling like an unfamiliar exercise and starts feeling like an available, practiced state you can return to whenever old anxious asking resurfaces. Let this small technique become something you can return to without needing a video to guide you through it again. 5 minutes. One settling breath, one felt feeling, one located sensation, one guiding sentence, 1 minute of simple rest. You stop asking when you start receiving. This costs nothing, requires no special setting, and can be practiced daily, becoming, over time, less a technique you perform and more a posture you simply inhabit more often than not. Now, gently bring your attention back to the room around you, to the sound of your own presence here, to the simple fact that you did not just watch this message, you practiced alongside it. That choice to actually participate is itself the entire difference between this video and countless others promising similar outcomes through information alone. Let us gather what this message has offered you. The recognition that intense wanting and genuine receiving are not the same internal posture, and that most manifestation practice quietly confuses the two. The understanding that anxious asking generates exactly the tension that interferes with the ease genuine reception requires. The distinction between action fueled by scarcity and action flowing from settled trust, the difference lying not in whether you act, but in the posture from which the action arises. The 5 specific minutes of practice, arrival, feeling, location, sentence, and rest, each building toward a settled internal posture rather than an anxious, reaching one. And the honest acknowledgement that this will feel unfamiliar at first, and that the unfamiliarity itself is simply old patterning being noticed, not evidence that the practice has failed. If this message reached you at the right moment, like this video now, not for an algorithm, but as a way of sealing this recognition in your own field of attention. Subscribe if you have not yet, because the next transmission will go deeper into what happens once this receiving posture becomes familiar. How everyday decisions begin to shift once anxious asking softens into settled trust, and why the people who eventually experience real, lasting arrival are rarely the ones who wanted the hardest. Share this with someone who has been exhausting themselves through anxious manifestation practice, someone who needs to hear that the shift they are actually looking for is quieter, and far more available than they have been told. There is one more thing worth saying before we close, because it tends to be the question that arrives first the moment this video ends. What if I practice this and the outcome still does not arrive? This is a fair, honest question, and it deserves a fair, honest answer rather than a comforting dismissal. Receiving posture does not guarantee any specific external outcome, because life includes real timing, real circumstance, and real factors outside any single person's internal state. What this practice actually guarantees is something quieter but, in its own way, more valuable. A different relationship with the waiting itself, one where the wait no longer costs you your peace while it unfolds. Sometimes that changed relationship with waiting does appear to influence what eventually arrives. Sometimes it simply makes the arriving, whenever and however it happens, far easier to actually receive when it finally does. You are not doing this wrong simply because the outcome has not arrived yet. You are not failing at manifestation simply because wanting harder has not worked. You stop asking when you start receiving. And perhaps the most powerful quantum technique of your life was never about forcing the field through intensity at all, but about the quiet, practiced willingness to settle, to feel, and to receive right now, in this breath, before the field ever needed convincing in the first place.